And I'm reading reports that Gen Z has become less desirable to hire because they tend not to want to adhere to traditional models. And while we could blame Gen Z entirely, adversely, I would like to point out that they watched both their parents working full time jobs and doing everything right. And then in 2008, their parents still lost their homes and their savings. And there didn't seem to be any loyalty to the worker. The workers sacrificed all their time and their loyalty and their friends and their family and their personal enrichment. They did everything like they were told, and yet they were still struggling. We saw it again in 2020 with COVID. People who had played by the rules and sacrificed plenty of late nights and weekends, people had been loyal to their company throughout. This loyalty, they thought it would be reciprocated. But yet they found themselves laid off and terminated before the first 2 weeks of flattening the curve was even over. There was no loyalty to these employees who had sacrificed so much for so many years. The only loyalty was to their own pocketbooks and maybe their stockholders. So, Gen Z probably thinks, what's the point? If I'm going to struggle and work 40 hours a week doing a job I hate, or I could struggle working 20 hours a week doing something I enjoy on a schedule I control, can you really blame them for being weary of following in their parents' footsteps when they saw them get burned twice? And also, while I keep hearing that there's this global shortage of workers, yet at the same time, nonstop, I'm reading and seeing articles and stories of massive layoffs. And everybody that I know who's out of work, they're telling me they're applying to hundreds of jobs with no reply. I was recently talking to a friend, and they said after months of looking and sending out resumes and filling out all the online applications at each of these different places, that they applied to over 1,000 jobs without even getting one human response or interview. Now, recently, this person was finally hired for a job, but only because they went to the same college and was a member of the same fraternity as the recruiter. And so, yes, while he was happy to finally be employed again, this process left a really bad taste in his mouth. And it's kind of terrified him to step out of line and to be back in this same situation, have to repeat this process. So he's now more willing to stay put in a bad job, but it's also less fulfilling. And what's that going to do to his productivity? And maybe that's going to motivate him just enough to not get fired, but he's still continuing to look for something else that's more rewarding. So it almost feels like, even though there is a demand for an employee, the owners of the workplace also want to scare you and remind you, don't question them, or else this will be your fate too. And while the narrative is that there is an increase in demands and expectations from the employees, what I know that's really increased is rent and gas and food. And these people just want a living wage and not to die from some small ailment because they couldn't afford basic health care. So what we need to do is we need to find common ground here.